أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we are now at lesson 18, which is the beginning of the topic of divine justice in the book. The author is going to dedicate 3 lessons to the topic of divine justice. He doesn't announce it, so he doesn't say we have started talking about a new principle, which is the divine justice. But generally speaking, this topic, so this one and the one that's going to be presented in the next lesson and the one after that are usually all studied under the heading of divine justice. And you will see that the connections between them are very clear. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Basically, the lesson has a long introduction, and then he spends maybe about as much or even less time on the clarification of free will, and then he answers 3 objections, which he considers to be the 3 main objections for determinism and against free will in this lesson. So for us, some preliminary remarks before we go into the topic itself. So if we recap right from the beginning, we spent a little bit of time talking about worldview and ideology and what we mean by religion being a worldview itself, and the difference between the theistic and the materialistic worldviews. And that series of lectures, including the types of knowledge and constitute kind of the premise or the introduction or the theory of knowledge premises that we need for aqa'id, for kalam and theology. And then the topics became a little bit more classic in that we went into the proofs for the existence of God subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the main attributes of Allah, the distinction between essence and action, attributes of essence and attributes of action. We went in some detail on both sides. We talked about some of the objections of why people deviate from this kind of belief, materialism, dialectical materialism, and the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that kind of constitutes Tawheed in general, or the first principle of the 5 principles we discussed when we started, being Tawheed, the second one being Adl. So generally speaking, we could say there was a good maybe 15 or so lectures, give or take, including the ones before that. We are now at lecture 18, dedicated to the topic of Tawheed itself, or the introduction to Tawheed. The topic of Adl, divine justice, is quite complicated depending on how you are addressing it or how you're exposing it or presenting it. Based on my research and my reading and studies and encounters and discussions, I would say that today some of the topics under the heading of divine justice constitute the biggest problem intellectually, rationally, in terms of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and religion, and specifically the heading of evil in the world. Even authors who are for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and presenting different arguments for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they struggle with this. I'm not saying necessarily Islamic scholars, non-Islamic scholars who are theists, who are for theism, who are against atheism, they still struggle with some of the topics under the heading of divine justice. Of course, they do not see the direct links between these. They see them as separate topics. So, for instance, free will and determinism is seen as a separate topic or theme, and divine justice being another, but the reality is they are all connected. And anyone who wants to see more connections, you simply have to kind of have a very even high superficial overview of how theology developed in Islamic history, and you're going to start seeing where the links are. So we can't forget that these lessons are very, very introductory. It doesn't go into the complex details and nuances and arguments, the back and forth that you find in very advanced works. And I'm not saying that it's necessary to have all of them. A lot of these are not the issues that we encounter nowadays, but some of them are, and others have not really been addressed that much. Or when they have been, they've been addressed in the very old medieval formulation. They need to be reformulated. So all that to say, if it were up to me and I had more time and we had a different setting, we would basically rethink those 3 lessons, make them a lot more detailed. I don't know in how many more lessons, but we would make them more detailed, and we would ensure that the shubuhat, the objections, the main arguments on both sides throughout history and today are properly understood. I do think that this is more introductory than it could have been. It could have been a little bit more detailed. And inshallah, once we're done the actual 20 lessons of volume 1, we can maybe spend a few, 1 or 2 or more, depending on the interest and the need, sessions just going Q&A, and this is where we can maybe delve a lot more in detail into the different nuances and arguments related to the divine justice. So I won't mention anything more here. There's a lot that I can say, but we'll stop. So the introduction of the lesson itself. So if you remember from the last lesson, when we were talking about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this becomes our transition into this topic of divine justice. And some of the reasons for this, that's what we're going to concentrate on, are rational reasons, philosophical reasons. There's a very clear link. Some of these reasons are also historical. So the reason why adl became an asl is because of this link that we're going to explain, and how people tried to resolve the issues that they encountered right from the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in different ways, and those different ways become adliya and non-adliya, or you believe in divine justice or you don't, so the others claim. So the link, to keep it at high level, is that when we explained the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we said that in effect, in reality, the only real causation taking place in the world is that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everything else falls under His causation. It doesn't have true causation. So, of course, one side of this, we said, of course, this is going to change the way we even live our lives. So when you know that everything is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you truly understand the oneness of Allah, that all causality is with Him, it gives you kind of a safety net. You're in good hands. You're in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything is with Him. So it becomes a lot easier to accept and to deal with the difficulties of life having that background, as opposed to someone who doesn't believe in God or who doesn't believe in this type of oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a lot more randomness and things being meaningless and things being difficult and absurd, as they say. There's an absurdity to the world, and believing that nothing has any meaning, no value, and so on and so forth. So what does it mean to exist as a human being, the human condition? And this is where you go into the atheistic existentialism and humanism and all of that. So the author starts from there, but then he quickly comes back to the topic of oneness. So if oneness is, as we understood it, meaning in the actions that there is only one true actor or agent in existence, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what do we do with the rest of the causes of the universe? What do we do with human beings who act and who are causes, the cause and effect that we encounter in the world? So here is where we see that Muslim scholars went into basically 2 different camps. And initially, this was a trigger, is one group tried to ensure that they are as staunch and solid believers in this oneness as possible. So they said, if we want to take this oneness to its full limit, it basically means that there is no causality except the causality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you encounter fire and you see that it has heat, you cannot say that fire is the cause of heat. If it burns, you can't say that the burning is the cause of the fire. This is unacceptable if you believe in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to say that there is a fire and there is heat, and so how do you explain this relationship between them? They say it's a matter of habit. It's as though there is a habit from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to generate these two things in a manner in which for us human beings we see that there is a causality, a causation between one and the other, and therefore the burning occurs. And so this is for everything in existence has to be explained this way. There is no causality. And then this is taken one step further, and this is where the real danger comes in. So at this level we can say the danger is more, philosophical difficulties, rational difficulties. But then when you take this and apply it to human behavior, and you say humans do not have any causality, they are basically tools, they're puppets being moved with the fingers, with the strings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He is the only one who is acting. He is the only cause. Everything else is only in appearance. It appears as though there is causality, but there is no causality. All causality is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just to other examples, when you drink water, it's not the water that basically quenches your thirst, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It just so happens that He creates that effect in you when you drink the water. Same thing with food, same thing with human action. So if I touch you and you feel that I'm touching you, that action that you're feeling, I'm not the cause of that action. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is causing that effect in you. He is the cause of that, not my action. So of course, when we go to human beings, what does that mean? So basically that means that human beings are not the authors, not the agents of any of their actions. And we quickly fall into determinism. So everything that is being done by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In appearance, it is as though we are the authors, we are the agents of these actions. But the reality is there is only one true cause, and that true cause is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nothing else. So what does that lead to? Obviously, it leads to no responsibility. If I am not the author of my actions, then I am not responsible for my actions. And then we go into, so what does that lead to? And so here we have, a whole series. First of all, we have determinism of human actions. So everything that we do, there's no free will. One, we're not accountable because it's not our actions. We have no say in what we're doing. We have no choice. We're not the decision makers. This leads to there's absolutely no distinction between one human being and another, one action and another, because we have nothing to do in that. It leads to the absurdity of all of creation, because if there is no free will, then what was the point of anything? And we'll go into that and how that is explicitly contradicted, let's say, with the Holy Quran. We have a lot of narrations and we have a lot of rational arguments that we can present, but we'll present a few verses from the Quran to see how that fits in. And then in general, from a rational point of view, no ethical system will become relevant, will become meaningful, and no legal system will make any sense either. If we're not responsible for our actions, if we do not have free will, there is no point talking about crime, for instance. There's no point talking about rights. There's no point talking about right and wrong. So all of that becomes void, and of course that includes the Islamic legal system. So responsibility or accountability includes the notions of reward and punishment. Those become moot and irrelevant. And the reason we're talking about this is because these became the big discussions. There's a direct link between the topic of oneness of Allah leading to the issues in divine justice that we have just entered into, including free will and determinism, that are going to have direct ramifications on the afterlife and the principles and questions of the afterlife. So, or command and prohibition. So what does it mean for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to order me, command me to do something, or prohibit me and say you're not allowed to do if I'm not the one doing? All of that becomes absolutely meaningless. So we're saying all of this falls under the general heading of us being accountable or responsible, and they derive from the idea of having a free will. So the purpose of our creation, in one way to put it, because we're talking about free will, let's spin it in that way. I think we can summarize the point of our creation is to see what do we do with our free will. It's to exercise our free will in one way or another. And depending on how we exercise it, there's going to be an outcome. That's our understanding without even going too much in detail in the Holy Quran. Just at a superficial level, if you read the verses of the Quran and you understand how the Quran talks about the point of our existence, the reason for creating the heavens and the earth and human beings and the jinn, it is for no other reason than to exercise our free will one way or another. So we'll come back to this in a second. So here are some verses. It is He who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, that He may test you. Which of you is best in conduct? Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. So here concentrate on the point. The point of the creation is to go through the test. What meaning is there to going through a test, going through a trial, if there is no free will? The test is the free will. Which of you is best in conduct? So is the conduct a matter of free will or not? So this applies and is repeatedly stated in the Quran. He who created death and life, that He may test you. Which of you is best in conduct? In Surah Tabarak. Indeed, we have made everything on earth as an ornament for it, that we may test them, which of them is best in conduct. Surah Al-Kahf. I have not created the jinn and the humans except to worship me. Well, how does worship work if there is no free will? If it's not me really worshipping? This is Surah Al-Dhariyat. Allah has promised the faithful men and women gardens beneath which rivers flow to remain therein, and good dwellings in the gardens of bliss, but Allah's pleasure is greater. That is the supreme triumph. Allah's pleasure and the gardens are a reward. Does the reward make any sense if there is no free will? So if we go to, yes?
These questions you're asking, how would they answer to that? There must be an answer. They can't be...
So, yeah, I'm going to give two very quick answers that they give. It's more to give it full, to do them fully justice, I'd have to explain these more. But generally speaking, the two answers are, first of all, you can't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or try to impose your reason and your definition of justice on His actions. And that's what you're trying to do. لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be subsumed. You cannot impose your definition of what is just and unjust on Allah. Whatever He does, that is the just. Your reason cannot determine what is just. And that's how justice became a asl. That's one. Two, they came back and tried to fix it, and they invented a theory, and there's a term for it. So I'm going to just give you the term and you go look it up to see if you can find any real definition to it. They say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who does. So He's the actor. Al-fi'l is all Him. Al-'iliyya is all Him. And the human being has kasb, or acquisition. The problem is some of their greatest scholars, the Ash'ara, when they try to define it, they say, and we are not able to say what kasb actually means. So how does that explain anything? What does it mean that we have kasb? So Allah is the one who does, okay, and I have kasb. So what does that mean? We don't really know.
Some say it meant like intent.
So
I
some
have the
say.
intention to do amal khair.
Yes. So Allah creates the amal and causality. Yes.
I'll be rewarded based on the amal or the bad intent.
So all of them, that's why I'm saying, just
There's
get
a lot
it.
of explanations, yeah,
Yes.
it's different.
But it's still, all of them are problematic.
Yeah.
So we would have to go through each one of them and show why it's problematic. But those are basically the two big answers. Don't ask,
And whatever
because
God
you
does is
add-
just.
because whatever God does is just. It's not there is justice and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions correspond to justice. It's the other way around. That's one. And two, one way to try to answer it is to say, oh, we have kasb. Okay, but what does kasb mean? One definition that was given, there's maybe 3 or 4 big ones, big themes, categories of definitions. And a lot of their scholars have openly said, we don't really, because they argue, those scholars have gone back to those definitions and they've shown that they're contradictory or they don't work. So they end up stating themselves, and we are not really sure, and I'll try to find a reference for that. We're not really sure what kasb means, but we have kasb. So there is no real answer. All of this is because they're trying to avoid falling into shirk and saying that there's more than one cause to anything. Okay? And we're going to see what how the Mu'tazila fell into the exact problem, that same problem. So when we say that the purpose of our creation is to exercise our free will, basically we understand it in 2 different ways here. One of them is to say that we have absolute servitude or ubudiyya, obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one way. The other one is to say our entire merit as creatures, these entities that we are, our entire merit is based on the manner in which we are exercising our free will. We have no other merit. Everything else, we have nothing into it. We don't play any role. The fact that my heart beats, I don't play any role into that. That happens on its own. If I have any merit as a creature, that merit comes from me exercising my free will. So the alternatives is, first of all, there is no free will. This is the alternative that we're discussing now. So we fall into determinism. This leads to no reward, no punishment, divine pleasure, divine wrath, all become absolutely meaningless. The absurdity of the act of creation, because if we're saying that the act of creation, its entire purpose is to see how we are going to exercise our free will, then the act becomes useless, becomes absurd, random. And the very well-known and easy classic metaphor, we basically end up in a theater of puppets. So we are puppets, and this universe, life, is a theater, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one moving all the puppets, and depending on the actions that these characters, the puppets, do and don't do, commit and don't commit, at the end, He takes some of them and tells them, you committed a good action, so you go to heaven, and you committed a bad action, so you go to hell. And the issue with that is, but they did not commit. You're the one moving the puppets. The puppets had nothing to do with it. And so maybe a quick note here to, because you mentioned something that I think we always have to mention it. When we're talking about these very broad, big schools of thought, of course it's not monolithic. It's not one way of seeing the world. Within that school, there's always a very hard position and a very soft position. It's an entire continuum, right? In any school that we go to. And we're going to see on the Mu'tazila side the same thing. There's on one extreme will go very far in one aspect, and then they'll be closer to something else, whatever is close here, or they will go, and others will go on the extreme on the other, and they'll be closer to, in this case, for instance, they'll be closer to the Mu'tazila, they'll be closer to us, depending on how hard or soft their belief in Jabr is. So some of them will say, no intent, nothing. And some of them will say, yes, intent, but no causality or no causation. So these are different shades of that same belief in general, determinism.
Yeah, I was topic came up, and like the school of Ahl Bayt is so singular. You know, our fiqh is Jafari, our spirituality is Jafari. There's no kufr between one side to the other, even within our ulama. There's a very singular thought on all aspects. The difference very minor. But within them, like you point out, their fiqh is here, is let's say Hanbali, but their theology is Athari, and even within those, there's so much this, you know, there's so many different ideas.
I agree with you that within them there's more discrepancy, more variety.
We have, but not nearly as much.
We have, yeah, but we have to the point where, like, if you study our history, you will see that we had periods, and until now it's very hidden.
Do not say people are fan is kufr.
Yeah, there is still claims that he is outside of the circle, and that's when we
Yeah,
talked
I
a
guess
little
that's
bit.
true. Yeah, no,
How wide or small do you cast your net, and you define your faith, or yeah. And these, in some cases, you see that the whole issue is a detail, but they make it into something big. And there are things that are actually big, and they make them small because political or other reasons, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of variety.
Yes.
I think where we have an advantage, let's say, as a school, is we have enough substance coming to us from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that we have more of a reference point than they do. They're more limited. We have the Quran, they have the Quran. So we have that. They have the tradition of the Holy Prophet, and we have the tradition of the Holy Prophet. But beyond that, they have nothing else. So it becomes human whims and humans at work, human dynamics. That's it. So it is what it is. You know, it's human dynamics. And we have human dynamics too. But we have an additional factor. We have the entire heritage we have from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, which is a lot. It does not even compare when you compare the amount of ahadith that we have with what they have, the seerah that we have, the examples from their real life that we have, and how the imams, the infallibles behaved in one circumstance versus another. We have a lot more to all agree upon. We all were looking at one imam and we saw how he behaved, and we're not going to disagree on that. It happened in front of us. Whereas what they have as a reference point stops with the Holy Prophet. So anything after that may or may not become a reference point. So some of them will say the Khulafa are a reference point or not. Or it goes to that so-and-so Khalifa or not. So the variety is going to be a lot bigger than ours. We have more of a reason to come together because we have a big, important additional factor. But there's still a lot of discrepancy internally within that. But it's a very good point. So here the author then goes into a little bit of it's not very long, and this requires a very good study too. It's very worth it, and it would be very interesting. The factors leading to this kind of thought emerging and being popular. This is not a new thought. Even in human history, it has always existed. And in human history, in Islamic history, it's no different. This idea of determinism and lack of free will being used for political means, being used by those in power to basically, on one side, make sure that you're controlling the masses, and on the other side, to justify whatever you're doing. And in Islamic history, there is a very clear point when this was introduced, and that's with Muawiyah and then Bani Umayyah in general. This was an ideology that was implanted in Islam. When Muawiyah would tell them, he would tell them, I have been made, you hate me and I hate you. And I have been made governor upon you, chosen by Allah, and there is nothing you can do about it. He's basically telling them, that's it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose me as your governor, chose me as your khalifa. You can't do anything about that. This is all determined. There is no freedom here. You cannot try to come up with an uprising and revolt against me. It wouldn't work. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen me, and there is no role that you can play to change that.
Like old English monarchies. Same.
Chosen. So this way, that's it. The populations, the masses, they grow up, the generations grow up with this kind of thinking. That you accept whatever is in place politically because it's chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's nothing you can do about it. Your free will, it doesn't play any role in this. And then whatever happens, well, it was meant to happen. And inshallah, we'll talk about it. This is the next lesson about the predestination and fate, or divine providence and decree. We'll talk about that inshallah. This is where we see that the links are very clear, with all of these topics being under divine justice. The second alternative. So all of this is one alternative. What's the other alternative? And the author doesn't spend any time on it. Those who realized the weakness of this position, those who realized that there are contradictions and huge issues, very problematic, to reject free will and to go towards determinism, they understood that, so they tried to come up with a solution to this. But here the author spends a little bit of time and he says, basically these are complicated issues. The entire topic of divine justice, with all of its subheadings, is a complicated topic. So it requires two things to land safely on a correct position. The first thing you need is enough intellectual maturity. If you don't have the tools to get into this topic and really research it and explore it in detail, you're going to have problems. That's one. And then two, you need a source of proper information giving you the answer to these questions. And he says, in some cases, a lot of those who talked about them had neither one. They didn't have the rational tools required, the complexity, the nuance of thinking required for these topics, and they didn't have Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. And in some cases, they did have the strong intellect, but they still did not have access or refused to go to Ahl al-Bayt for an answer, so they came up with their own answers from their own. And this is one of the answers that they gave. So he doesn't go in detail, he just talks about delegation or tafweed. So what is this tafweed that they talk about? Well, this was the position of the Mu'tazila, and it was in direct, clear reaction to the position of the Ash'ara. So in reaction, in opposition to determinism, the Mu'tazila came back with absolute free will, to the point where they say that the divine power, the divine will, has nothing to do with human free will. It plays no role. And so they go back to the same position that we talked about earlier, adopted by the Jews, described in the Quran, and some others in the Muslim community, who basically believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything and He let it be. He gave you the power you need, and that's it. He cannot intervene in the causality of anything anymore. So as we said, there's a hard position and a soft position. The hard position is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unable. It is not of His nature to intervene in anything. Any causality, including human causality, human free will, human action. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot just come and change the fact that fire burns or doesn't burn. And this is where you see the Mu'tazila going very far, maybe exaggerating the rational aspect of their interpretation of everything. So here they say, for us to defend absolutely divine wisdom from the creation of everything, so that we don't fall in absurdity, if the point of creation is free will, and if we want to maintain that we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can play absolutely no part in our free will and in our actions as human beings. So they cut Him out completely. And this is what we disagree with. It's not that much freedom. There is freedom, there is a free will, but it's connected within the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, within the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not an absolute. And this is why we spent so much time when we talked about Tawheed, we spent so much time talking about the different types of causality. And we said that there's a difference between these, and this is the issue. So there's two big points that the Mu'tazila got hung up on. There's more, but let's condense them into two. The first one is they don't want to contradict divine wisdom and divine justice. The second one, more philosophical one, and we talked about it a little bit with the Ash'ara, they do not accept, they cannot see how the same action, the same act, the same effect can have more than one cause. And we agree with them. The moment you have more than one cause, one full ultimate cause, not partial cause, you're going to have a problem. You cannot have two alihah. You cannot have two ultimate causes to the same effect. And we talked about this. Because of this problem, that you cannot have more than one cause, they said, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we cut him off. To preserve free will, to preserve our causality, we cut off Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely, entirely. And that's why they call it tafweed, or my best attempt is delegation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delegated entirely the causality to us. He plays absolutely no role in it. So these are the two main issues. And they're not that difficult to answer because we have all the tools now. We understand the vertical causality. We understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can never be cut off completely. If we have power, it's because He is giving us the power. And we made the distinctions between the legislative and existential will and legislative and existential lordship. When we talked about this, it is because we knew that others fell into the trap. They took things at surface value. They created binary dichotomies. It's either this or that. It's either free will, 100% free will, or 100% determinism. No, there's a third way between them. But who can come up with that in the proper way and explain it in the proper way?
Sayid, would they say they have free will over legislation also, like Sharia?
No. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has explained and given us the rules.
And existentially, they say,
We have one, He has given us the power. And that's it. And there is absolutely no, it's kind of like the first mover. There's absolutely no intervention.
But then dua, for example.
It becomes a very rational interpretation of the world at that point. It may be good for you and you may get thawab for it, but don't consider that as having any causality. Yes, there's no intervention.
There's no point of dua then, other than the thawab.
Aristotle, go back to Aristotle, you get a very, very Mu'tazili view of the world. Yeah. It's very almost deistic, not theistic. So free will is granted by God. Okay, so I don't want to skip that. So the author basically says that the only way to understand oneness properly is to go back to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, who at that point were very active. He doesn't add this, but anyone who goes back into their history, they were very active making sure that their followers understood the proper ideological, theological positions to take between what the Asha'ira were pushing and what the Mu'tazila were pushing. And of course, you add to that, and we're not going to get into it now, but you add to that the political dimension. So there were times when the Mu'tazila were a lot more popular, right? When the Abbasiyin came in, they completely relied on the positions of the Mu'tazila in opposition to the Asha'ira who were closer to the Umayyadeyn and so on and so forth. So if you go into those details, you see the very delicate role that the Imams were playing theologically and politically and making sure that their followers understood the ideological positions that they had to make and not fall into the same issues and traps that would lead people to either become kafir or mushrik in a lot of cases, basically, if you take it to its logical conclusions. Yeah.
What do you mean politically? Even they use their power or subtle influence to push them in that direction?
No, not the Imams, but the surrounding environment is political. Because when you have a Khalifa who sides with a group, he's just waiting for the Imam to show that he is not sided with that group, and anyone who follows the Imam is going to be now a non-believer, and the Khalifa will use that as a pretext to annihilate those people. If you believe in Adl, you're the enemy. No, today if you believe in the Adl, you're our friend, and if you don't believe, you're an enemy. If you believe in the Quran being created, you're the enemy. No, today if you believe in the Quran being created, you're a believer and everybody else is the enemy. This is the position that the Imams were playing without openly stating this is wrong, this is right. They would show it to their followers by showing them how to argue it properly, so that it doesn't become blind faith. The Imams would spend a lot of time explaining the arguments and where they're inconsistent rationally and inconsistent with the Quran. But this is a big topic. It requires a good discussion. So free will is granted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So power is derived or extended from a superior source, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is where our accountability comes from. If we are accountable, it's because we have free will. And that free will is nothing but a power, and that power is given to us by another power. So this is the vertical causality that we explained again and again. The ultimate, the absolute causality that we explained again and again is never lost according to the position of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. So the others are falling into a contradiction with one of these principles. Either they are losing the free will, therefore the accountability, therefore divine justice, or they're losing the absolute causality of Allah, like the Mu'tazila, who basically cut Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala off from the equation and said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot play any role. There's no more intervention from Allah. Otherwise, we're not free. No, we are free. We are free, but our freedom is a power that comes from the power of Allah and is maintained that way by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, I didn't mention any of the narrations, but there's a lot of narrations that talk about, in one way or another, all of these topics. The last one is the one thing that I wanted to mention quickly, because anyone who reads these narrations will notice that there are instances where the Imams alayhim salam, they tell their followers, or they tell the person asking them, you should not be delving into these topics, whereas they explain it to others. This is a complicated topic. So if the Imam fears that the person is not going to understand, he tells them basically, this is not for you. Maybe if he's a scholar and he's asking, or he thinks that the Imam thinks that the person is going to understand what is being told, the Imam is going to explain it to him. But if the person does not have any of the rudimentary intellectual tools, rational tools required to get into this and understand the nuances, the Imams in some of these cases told him, don't get into this. Because the Imam knows the person is not going to understand, and there's always an additional danger for people asking the Imams, is they're going to go and report that the Imam said, and they misunderstood what the Imam said. So the Imams cut them off. There's a lot of instances of that. So we have to always look further when the Imams are being asked, and they're answering questions. We always have to go further beyond than just a person asking. It's not a one-on-one interaction. The Imam doesn't stop there. The moment that you see that this narration has reached us, it means the Imam knew there's a whole other context. There are other people sitting. Sometimes it's only the followers of the Imam. Sometimes it's people waiting for the Imam to contradict the Khalifa, or the scholars of the Khalifa to kill the Imam, or to go say the Imam is now one of those who are outside of religion. Always those interactions are at play, so we have to always keep it in mind when we interpret. So clarifying free will. What is free will? So let's start with the faculty, the ability to make decisions. For all of us, I think this should be something that comes very intuitively. The knowledge, the awareness, the consciousness, the direct experience, the ilm huduri, the direct experiential knowledge that we are about to, or we are making a decision. This is what free will is. If you have not experienced free will, it would be very difficult to explain it to you. Right? It's a state. It's something you have access to, and anything you have access to experientially, you can't really explain it with words. If I tell you something tastes sweet and you've never tasted sweet, no words can really tell you what sweet is, because it's something that you have knowledge of through experience. Decision-making, free will fall in this category. And sometimes an example they use here, they say, for instance, if someone is really not understanding or arguing, tell them would you not put yourself in the position of someone standing at the top of stairs? And in one case, the person decides to go down the stairs, and they actually go down the stairs. And in another case, they are pushed and they fall down the stairs. As you're going through that, falling or coming down, do you not feel that there's a difference in your control of the situation? Well, that's what we're talking about when we say we have free will. That feeling of, I decided to go down the stairs and I am going down the stairs, versus I do not have free will and I am not falling out of my free will. I was pushed, I slipped, something happened, and this is out of my control. It may look the same, but it's not the same. And the difference is something that you feel directly and you experience directly. I don't need to be explaining this to you from the outside. You should be experiencing this directly, internally. So of course, this applies to psychological states, our feeling that we exist, our feeling, sometimes people doubt that they exist. So you bring it back to the most rudimentary thing. Our philosophers like Ibn Sina say, well, do you doubt that you doubt? You can't doubt that you doubt. If you say, do you exist? You say, I exist. Okay, that's my starting point, right? Like René Descartes started with that, right? I think, therefore I am. Ibn Sina pushes it even more. And he says, you know what? And Descartes talks about that too. Is that, can you doubt? If you're not thinking, if you're not even sure that you're thinking, then you're doubting. Do you doubt that you're doubting? Well, you can't doubt that.
You can't be sure. If you're sure, that means you know you are.
But he's bringing it back to something that you have to start all your knowledge from. He's going to build on that. So that's why here the author just says doubt. You know, like you can't doubt that you doubt, so let's start from there. He's basically saying your feeling of free will is something like that you feel directly. Yeah.
Is there a difference between doubting and thinking? Like according to Ibn Sina and Descartes?
Yes.
Because Descartes isn't the one who say تستطيع أن تفكر أنك تفكر دون أن تفكر.
Yes. Yeah, the same thing. Yes. Yeah. So he's basically saying that you are thinking, and if you're not even sure that you're thinking, you're doubting, then that's still good enough. That means you are thinking. Yeah. Relationship of decision making with instincts and desires. So here he's going to start establishing where free will comes from. So for me to make decisions, what kind of decisions do I make? What kind of free will do I have, and where do I make decisions? So he goes from things that are very rudimentary animal instincts. I have hunger, it drives me, I have will to eat. I'm thirsty. Self-preservation, I'm defending myself, so on and so forth. Then it starts getting a little bit more complex. We're human beings. I'm sick, I need medication. Medication tastes bitter. Or I need treatment and it hurts. I got really hurt and they need to burn me, or they need to pour something that hurts on it, or they need to amputate, or they need to, and I agree. Okay, this is a higher level of intelligence at play. It's more sophisticated in terms of decision making. It's no longer action-reaction. There's a layer of thinking here. It's still rudimentary, it's still very simple, but it's more than an animal can do. Right? An animal will not accept that you can just go and amputate, let's say. But a human being will understand, but it's going to save my life. Yes, you can go and amputate. Yes, I will go through chemo. Yes, I will accept the bitterness of the medication that I'm taking. Abstinence. The ability to force yourself to abstain from something that you want. So let's say you want to, I don't know, get a degree, and you prevent yourself from partying and chilling and spending time doing all sorts of activities during that time so that you finish that degree. Okay, well, there's a process here that is much more complex, much more complicated, much more nuanced of decision making and free will at play than I'm hungry, I go after food. Okay, so it's getting a little bit more sophisticated. Then there is sacrifice. So this could be anything and everything, all the way to your own life and the lives of those around you. In the cases of soldiers, for instance, He's willing to become a soldier. He's willing to sacrifice himself. So where's the free will in that? It becomes a very complex, altruistic, and beyond the animal instincts and action-reaction that we see in animals, let's say. And the discipline always around all of that. So the issue is human beings do have these conflicting faculties, these conflicting desires and instincts in all of them all the time. How we attribute and ascribe merit and distinction to human beings is with their ability to manage those conflicts. Of course, everybody has hunger. Of course, everybody wants money. Of course, everybody wants fame. Of course, these are the basic desires. Everybody has them. This is where we have to see that free will is not just acting upon those desires. It's a lot more complicated than that. Otherwise, everybody would be the same. The fact that different people can sacrifice here and be disciplined there and abstain here shows that there's free will at play. It's not action-reaction. And so, of course, here, this is a difference between, let's say, blind desire and examined reason. Again, and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That would take it to another level. Or, someone who is driven by some selfish reason versus altruistic, you're doing it for others, versus you're doing it for something transcendental, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you act, is it short term? Is it long term? Is it eternal? Okay, so this means that the free will is being exercised even though the desires are there. There's a lot of desires and they're in conflict. They're not enough to force you into a position. With all of this, in one case you may be strong and choose eternal, and another case you may be weaker and choose short term. What's the difference? The difference is you're exercising free will, and it's not always easy. But it's not automatic, it's not mechanic, right? That's the point here. So all of this varies from one individual to another. The agreed upon part, though, is that we all go through this. So we all have the free will. This part is universal. How we exercise it depends. And it requires practice. And practice makes that free will work in one way or another. In the same person or from one person to another. And of course, all of this is linked back to spiritual development. So the more you go through this, and the more you apply that free will to be able to manage the conflicts between the desires, the instincts, low, high, the more you gain spiritual development. The more you become human. So again, all of this, now we went into the mechanics of it, all of this is based on free will. So, if we keep all of that in mind, yeah.
I know you used a lot of those points to prove free will, but when I read your psychology or your childhood or your innate animal instincts, in today's world, a lot of people will say we're just organisms and we're just living out this predestined life. So it's not a theological proof that we have no free will, like the Asherites, but it's a materialistic proof that we have no free will. And I don't know, just an observation. I don't care.
It's a really good observation, and we actually talked about it when we talked about materialism, if you guys remember. We said one of the issues with materialism is they're going to fall into determinism.
But why this shift, do you think, where that, like, secularly people would want to move to that?
Well, there's nothing else. There's only matter. What else is there?
It's like, yeah,
And this is number two.
It's concrete. It can't be something
Yeah,
else.
this is objection number 2. It's a really good objection. The objection is, it's all based on our material or physical constitution. Genetic, psychological. The first one is more...
childhood,
Yeah.
I eat.
Exactly. So this is the first one. The second one is more only materialistic. The first one is more psychological. So we're going to come to them in a second. Yes, there's a question?
Does this also apply to people with like mental disabilities? Or?
So it applies to you to the extent that you have free will. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your merit is based on the amount of free will that you have. So if I have a disability that prevents me from having a free will, then of course I'm only responsible for my free will part. The rest is outside of my responsibility. And inshallah, when we'll talk about divine justice, because this is going to enter into the topic of evil in the world and all the different types of evil in the world, this is what we're going to introduce, another factor for us believers in more than just this life. And here's the key, more than just this life, this idea of a recompense, a compensation. So if you believe that at the end of the day, for me to judge whether, pardon the expression, to judge whether the act of God is a just act or not, was it evil or just, if you allow me to introduce this life and the afterlife, then I'll show you that there's no issue. But if you want to limit me to only this life, oh, there's going to be huge issues.
There's no justice, especially for the disability.
There is no justice. Not only for that, for everything. There is no justice in this life. But who said there was supposed to be? Whoever said that this is supposed to be justice here? What justice is there when, you have Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he talks about the life of the Holy Prophet and how he lived, he said, this is proof enough that this is not the point, this life. If you understood how the Holy Prophet lived, because the Holy Prophet is way beyond anything that this life can handle. And yet this is how he lived and how he died. So, and this applies for us to all of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So this makes you realize, you think you're going through grave injustices? When Imam Ali alayhi salam says, life has brought me down and then brought me down and then brought me down. 3 times he repeats it. To the point where it is said there's Ali and Muawiyah. As if those two go in the same sentence. But this is the reality of what he's facing, right? They're constant reminders of the injustice of this life. So if you're stuck here, you're only stuck with this life, and you only look, your horizon starts when the moment we're born and stops with the moment we die, or let's say the beginning of the universe and the end of what we know as human life, we're going to have huge issues with divine justice.
Back to what the sister said, again, but it seems like today's world, with the hot topic of mental health, again, it seems like we all have some sort of mental health issue, and again, we're just an organism living out
Yes.
this forced condition upon me.
Action, reaction, right? And you have
No, we have none.
Yes.
And so I guess how you answered is, when you don't believe in God, this is almost going to be what you're reduced to.
That's it. You're stuck with material,
Fish.
only material. Yes. Only material, action, reaction. Mechanical, action, reaction. And you cannot go and look for any tool, any solution from outside. There is no outside to you.
So
You're stuck. Existence equals matter. If you remember the four principles of materialism.
So you said the reason we've come to conclude this is because our belief in God is weak as a society.
And it's going to keep getting worse until people wake up, and they have woken up. And inshallah, one day we'll talk about that. That's another topic. But yes, they have, of course. But now they're ascribing consciousness to matter. And they say the whole universe is awake, and you have to talk to the universe and go back to the universe and Mother Gaia, which is the earth, and. So why? Because matter, dead matter on its own, is causing all these issues. But so instead of going back
to run away from the definition that this is God, they are trying to find another definition for this.
Yeah, take all the attributes, put them in matter itself, and now matter is conscious and alive, and it understands, and it reacts to you, and you react to it, and that's it. Of course they have, those who are more illuminated, and they're trying to find solutions to all of this. Right? So that's where, and it's a very natural thing. Yeah, and it's a reactive. They've run into a crisis. Yes, it's all action, reaction. School proposes, runs into a problem. Some people keep defending it to the death. Others come and say, okay, let's come up with a solution to it. And anyways, let's try to go here quickly. I have already run out of time. Objections of determinists. So here, the issue, what the author is saying, is if we understood what we have said so far, none of us should ever doubt that we have free will. It's something that we should experience ourselves directly. No one should come and make us doubt of the fact that we have free will. Just like no one should come and make us doubt that how I'm feeling right now. I experience it directly. How can someone come in with rational arguments show me that what I'm experiencing directly is wrong? It's not an illusion that I have free will. Okay, so where are the issues? The issues are, there are some questions, and because this is a sometimes complex, difficult topic, people become unable to find an answer, and because they have no answer, or they have a weak answer, or they don't have the background for it, they say, okay, well, yeah, maybe it's true, I don't have free will. That's what happens. It's not that you're doubting that you actually have it when you have it. And so the author spends a little bit of time on this, and it's an important point. That understood, let's go quickly to the three main objections. First one is the objection that there is no such thing as a free will. All that there is are internal predispositions and internal inclinations towards things. That's what free will is. What we think is a free will is actually not free will. They're just your internal inclinations and predispositions towards something. It's psychological stuff. So the answer, in short, is that an internal predisposition, an internal inclination, I think anyone would agree, is different from the actual decision making. I'll agree with you that we all have internal inclinations. Are those equal to my decision? Regardless of all of my inclinations right now, I'm deciding, do I touch this pen or I don't touch it? And I have a choice to make. And maybe I will surrender to one inclination over another. Right? And maybe not. Maybe right now I feel like this and tomorrow I'll feel somewhere. But in there, I do feel very directly, there's no mediation, it's immediate. I feel very directly that the decision is mine to make. This is the free will part. So don't confuse them. We do have inclinations, we do have predispositions, but they are different from the actual decision-making ability, which is our free will. Okay, so of course, yeah, it contributes to, but it is not it. It's a difference. Second, free will is equal to natural constitution. And this is where it goes to what you're saying, because now we're introducing all of what modern science has to say. For instance, your genetic predisposition. For instance. So here you can add all of your psychology and your childhood trauma and what you have gone through in society and so on and so forth. So one person may have a predisposition to be more angry than someone else, so they'll be more angry than someone else. Okay. But they can still decide not to be angry. And for them, it may be a lot more difficult than the other person who doesn't have that predisposition. And so for them, not being angry means a lot more spiritual growth and development. And it means a lot more reward. And they have a lot more merit and a lot more distinction as a human being for that growth and for that effort and for that discipline because of that predisposition. And this applies to everything. This is if you believe in divine justice and understand it. So we recognize, and this is where I've added here the first bullet, recognized by religion, is because sometimes people say, even our religion recognizes that genetically some people are predisposed. Yeah, of course it does. In fact, it did before, maybe others did.
And the narrations is mentioned.
Again and again. Okay, so this is not the issue. The issue is not that it doesn't recognize it. It's what do you do about it? Does it mean that it's now predetermined upon you how you're going to react and how you're going to act? You're telling me Al-Abbas alayhi salam had no freedom of choice in how he acted just because of who had given birth to him? That's basically the argument. Exactly. So this is where you start seeing that no, you cannot just put it all under one umbrella and saying it's genetic predisposition, it's the way you were raised, it's your society, it's all of these things together leading to that action. No, no. Yes, all of these are factors, but at the end, you still made a choice. And that choice is yours and yours alone, and you alone are responsible for it. And of course, if it's easier for you, good. If it's more difficult for you, even better. If it's a good choice. Free will in spite of difficulty, this is your spiritual development, merit, and reward. The third objection, those who say there is no free will, divine knowledge is absolute. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything that will ever happen, then obviously that means that it's all predetermined. There is no free will. Because it must happen this way, otherwise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not know it. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, it means there's only one course of action, predetermined, there is no free will, because of divine knowledge. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, omniscience is absolute, then there is no freedom of choice. There is no free will. There is no volition. The easy answer, although it requires books, the easy answer is the difference between knowing and causality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has knowledge. Are you saying that Allah's knowledge is causing it? Knowledge is as though you're revealing what's going to happen. You're revealing, you have a revelation of what's going to happen. A veil is lifted and you can see what actually happens. Is that equal to causing it? Is that equal to saying it's predetermined? No. So this one is a topic that requires more, and inshallah we'll come back to it. But this is the short answer. Knowledge and causality are two different things. That I know does not mean that it's predetermined. An example that works to some extent and doesn't work in other aspects is a teacher who has a group of students at the beginning of the year, and right from the beginning he can tell which ones are going to end up with really good grades and which ones are not. Which ones are going to fail right from the beginning. Is that knowledge predetermining those students? Is that taking away any of their freedom of will? How about that, sloppy student, if he decided to actually sit and work, he would prove the teacher wrong, right? That's why I'm saying the example doesn't work entirely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there are aspects of it that work, which is that knowledge is not equal to the causality itself. And then the other aspect of it, which is an addition to it, Allah's knowledge includes our free will. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that He has given us free will. He knows that we have a free will and that we're exercising it. And He knows if we're going to change our mind or keep our mind or make the decision or not make the decision. Which re-emphasizes the same point, which is knowledge is not causality. These are two different things. Of course, we could add to this the easy argument that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is outside of time, and that makes this entire argument fall very quickly. But that's another, because it requires a good discussion about what time is and how it works. The last objection is about predestination and divine providence. So it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who decides, who predetermines how the world works, who preconditions all the circumstances around our world, the fate, the divine providence, the decree, and therefore there is no free will. We're stuck in one course of action. So this, inshallah, is going to be the topic of the next lesson. So this is why the author put them in this order. So he linked today's topic with the oneness, and now the next topic is going to become the last objection of this one, which is predestination and divine providence. So inshallah, now you can clearly link all of this back. There are many narrations. I don't want to take too long from the Imams alayhim as-salam. In one narration, someone comes to Imam al-Rada alayhi salam and he asks him, he tells him, has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given full power of people over all of their actions? And the Imam tells him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has more sovereignty than that. has more izzah, Allahu a'azz, than to give full authority. There is no such thing as full authority on Allah. You can't say both. Allah a'azzu min dhalik. It's like, okay, so has He created their actions that are sins? He tells him, Allah is more just than that. So he tells him, then what is it? And so it's a little sentence at the end of which the Imam alayhi salam is basically saying, Allah has said, O children of Adam, human beings, I have given you power, and with that power you commit your sins. So the Imam is telling him what we're talking about, which is this vertical causality. Allah is not creating the sin, which is another objection against what the Asha'ira talk about, which is a blasphemy. But we didn't talk about it today. But in books of theology, it's mentioned. One of the issues we have with the Asha'ira is, so you're basically attributing the sin itself to Allah. You're saying He is the one, He's the only one performing all actions, therefore He is the one performing the qabih, the sin, the ugly action, the unacceptable action. Anyway, so that's the end of that hadith. There's a key there. When the Imam says, I have given you, the Imam says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to human beings, I have given you the power with which you commit your sins. Okay, and then there's a number of other narrations, but this one is a very famous one. Inshallah, today's lesson helped understand it when Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, La jabra wa la tafweed, no determinism, no delegation, innama amrun bayna amrayn. It is something between two other things. It is something in between. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.